Hello, this module is about JavaScript objects. In your CS1 and 2 classes, objects are compared to real-life objects. We are extending the same concept to JavaScript. A JavaScript object is an entity with properties that define its characteristics and functions that define its behavior. Functions associated with an object are called methods. For example, a car and a college class are two different kinds of objects. Properties describe the object's characteristics. The car has a color, dimensions, gas, and a body type. The course is very different from a car, but we can also describe it in terms of its names, starting and ending dates, and its instructor. Objects also have behaviors. A car can be turned on and off, fill the gas tank, open and close doors. A course can provide a description and change its instructor. These behaviors are implemented using a function that is tied to the object's definition called a method. In this video, we will look at defining objects using object literal notation and how you reference them in your code. I have posted the examples that I am demonstrating here in the video on the course website if you would like to follow along. So first we will get started by defining the object for a course. We can do that by using variable definition syntax, so we'll call it variable webdev. And the object is defined as a comma-separated list of name-value pairs in between curly braces. So my first name-value pair is the name of my course, WebDev, which is Introduction to Web Development. Subsequent name-value pairs are separated with a comma. Here, I am creating a name-value pair that contains a space. Then we will add in the semester end and the name of the instructor. Now we have our object called WebDev. So now that we have our object definition, we can talk about accessing properties. We will do so by using the dot notation and array notation. We will also talk about how to change existing property values and add new properties. Finally, we will talk about nested object types. So now I'm just going to use the console to demonstrate how to access properties on an object. The first way of doing this is using the dot notation. You should be familiar with this from your CS1 and 2 courses. So in order to do this, I type the name of my variable, WebDev, and then the property that I'm wanting to access. So in this case, I want to access the name of my course, and hit enter, and you have Introduction to Web Development, which is the value of my property name. I can also do webdev.instructor. You can also access other properties like instructor in another manner. So let's take a step back for a second and review how we would access elements in an array. So what I've done here is I have taken and rewritten the WebDev object as an array. You'll notice that I don't have the name pair, so I have to use the index to reference an element from my array. So saving the file and refreshing it, stating the name of the array, and using the array notation to access the element. Objects declared with braces and name-value pairs are very similar to objects. In other words, JavaScript objects are associative arrays whose indexes are the property names. Therefore, we can use the square bracket notation to reference properties defined on that object. For example, if I wanted to get the name, I can say WebDev, square bracket notation, name, and I get the same result. The square bracket notation is very useful if you have a variable that has the name of my property. So if I were to say, let eDate get the value semester end. So now that I have eDate and it has the value semester end, which also corresponds to the property name, I can come in and say WebDev, square bracket notation, and then reference the eDate variable, I also can retrieve the value. Now, the use of square bracket notation is required when you have a situation where the name of the property contains a space or a number. In order to access the semester start property, I need to use the square bracket notation, and in quotation marks, I will specify the name of the property, semester start, and then I am able to access that property. While including spaces with the property name and beginning the name with a number is possible, it is not recommended. So since arrays and objects are so similar, when would you use one over another? Well, it comes down to, if you want to refer to the element names as strings, then define an object. Objects are not static. We can change their values by simply assigning a new value to the property. For example, suppose I want to change my last name to match my husband's. I can change the instructor property to reflect the new last name, and I would do it like this. webdev.instructor equals the new value, Christine Peralta. Now when I access that property, it reflects the new value. I can also add new properties by referencing the new property and giving it a value. Note that it is not a requirement that the property exist before I access it and give it a new value. So for example, I want to include the online start date for our class. So webdev online start will get it the value March 23rd. Now when I reference the object, you'll notice that online start is a new property that is appended to the end of our object. In the examples so far, our name value pairs have been simple values. For example, we've just had strings as values. However, I can have more complex data types. I can have nested objects or nested arrays. So in our example, I want to change the start and end dates, and I want to combine that into a single property value called semester dates. And the semester dates themselves will be the start date and the end date. So here in this example, the value is another object definition, the start date and the end date. Now when I want to access the start date and the end date, I can chain together the dot notation to access the subproperties. So again, I reference webdev, then semester dates, and then the date that I wish to access. January 4th. And then changing these values is done the same way. webdev.semesterdates.end is going to be changed from May 5th to June 5th. So now when we access the webdev object, you will see that the values, the subproperties, have changed. Now I'm going to add a new property, which is an array. The array is going to be an array of topics that the class covers. Accessing the elements of the topics is done in the same manner as accessing a regular array value. But first I need to access, of course, the object, the name of the property, and then I use the array notation to access the elements of the array. HTML topics, I can say length -1 to get the last element from that particular array. All right, so this summarizes what we have talked about with object literals. We have defined properties on an object using name value pairs. We can access the properties on an object using the dot notation or by referencing the name of the property using the square bracket notation. We reviewed how to change the values of a property by assigning new values to an existing property. And lastly, we can create new properties by stating the new property and assigning a value.